Now it's 9:45. Tonight's Kaleidoscope examines the many film and television adaptations of the works of Graham Greene. Nigel Andrews presents Greene on the Screen.
Watching the dark alien executive tipping his cigar ash behind the glass partition in Wardour Street, the Hungarian producer adapting the writer's ideas tactfully at Denham, the German director letting himself down into his canvas chair at Elstree, and the London film critics, I speak with humility, I am one of them, exchanging smutty stories over the hock and the iced pudding and the brandy at the Carlton, I cannot help wondering whether from this great moneyed industry anything of value to the human spirit can ever emerge.
A pessimistic reflection, but Graham Greene should know. Although speaking as a film critic in the 1980s, I should like to say that I have never exchanged a smutty story at the Carlton, nor even been plied overmuch with hock and brandy. But Greene began his movie life, both as critic and screenwriter, in the 1930s, when the cinema was at its zenith in productivity and popularity. Hungrily omnivorous producers stalked the land for stories, and the needs of the human spirit took second place to the needs of an ever-turning turnstile. No novelist except Dickens has ever had such saturation exposure, combined with such up-and-down fortunes on the movie screen, as Greene, whose filmic career spans 50 years and 30-odd films. With the author celebrating his 80th birthday in October, and enjoying next month a retrospective of his films at the National Film Theatre, this seems a good moment to look at the bumpy history of Greene on the screen, from The Fallen Idol to The Honorary Consul, Brighton Rock to Travels with My Aunt, and to talk to some of the toilers in celluloid who have tried to capture that elusive country of the mind called Greenland. And we also try to discover just how far Greene's writing lives up to its reputation for being cinematic.
One is influenced, just as Henry James was, to compare a molehill of a mountain. I mean, Henry James was influenced by the theatre, and the Victorian novelist was often influenced by painting, I think, wasn't he? It was an aesthetic thing. The descriptions in Scott, for example, could be a painting by Constable. And I suppose I've been influenced by a moving eye of the camera.
Round and round Trafalgar Square the buses went like circus horses. The high squeal of the Wolseley's hooter pierced through a traffic block. Cars ground their brakes. The policeman raised his hand, and they were shaken out into Charing Cross Road, temporarily bare of traffic. The whores flowed down one pavement and up another. A row of men peered into peep shows.
This ordered helter-skelter style of details caught on the wing is remarkably similar to the techniques of film montage. So does it follow that it transfers easily to the screen? Director Peter Duffell, whose 1972 version of England Made Me found rare favour with both Greene and the critics.
It's the concrete nature of Greene. It's his style, his writing style, where he uses kind of cinematic montage techniques which you can bring to the screen in a way. You can take the cue from that. I mean, we did certain things in the film which I think were inspired in style by Greene's own methods in his novels at that time, the pointing towards certain objects in a mise-en-scène to give you a feeling of place. That, in a way, is the easiest thing, but it is a deceptive easiness, because what his stories are about, what his novels are about, essentially, is the human condition, not the externals. The externals, which are easy, relatively easy to put on the screen, are in fact no more than an objective correlative for the interior emotions and feelings that are going on. His novels are about the human condition, about betrayal and guilt, and the failings of the world we live in. I think it was Arthur Calder Marshall who called it Greenland, something which I think Graham Greene himself, a phrase which he was never very happy with. But anyway, it's stuck, and people know what you mean when you say Greenland, which is that kind of sordid reality of ordinary humdrum existence, in the middle of which are being played out matters of great pith and moment.
Peter Duffell. The playwright Christopher Hampton, who adapted The Honorary Consul for the screen, also thinks there is a special kind of Graham Greene world.
I think the key to a successful adaptation of a Graham Greene film has to do with atmosphere and tone rather than content. That's to say that the most successful film versions of his novels, like The Third Man or Brighton Rock or The Fallen Idol, have an intense feeling of place about them. And I don't mean that kind of mythical land which is populated by drunken priests and lapsed Catholics of one sort or another. I mean simply the physical look of the film. I think one of the difficulties with The Human Factor, which was the film that preceded us, was that although they ran out of money, as you probably know, but one of the difficulties was that they went to film in Kenya, standing in for South Africa, and succeeded in making it look like Rickmansworth. It didn't actually give you any feeling of the place at all.
Christopher Hampton. As far as matching setting to sensibility is concerned, Greene's heyday in the cinema was undoubtedly in the late 1930s and throughout the 1940s, when his early thrillers and downbeat morality tales found a perfect mirror in the wartime and post-war film noir genre, that style in which shadows gloomily riot on a black and white screen, characters wear either a hat or a frown, or that favourite green garment, the raincoat, and the dialogue is determinedly laconic.
It's good luck. Cats bring you luck. Yeah, it's hungry. Ain't got nothing for you, Tuffy.
You like cats, don't you?
Yeah, they're on their own. They don't need anybody.
Well, this one could do with a friend. So could you.
They're trying to make me go soft.
Alan Ladd and Veronica Lake sparring together in This Gun for Hire. This was based on Greene's A Gun for Sale, and though neither it nor its Hollywood successor in the early 40s, The Ministry of Fear, found much favour with Greene, Quentin Falk, author of a new study of the novelist cinema called Travels in Greenland, finds qualities to admire in both if one isn't over-preoccupied with fidelity.
To take two of his early books, The Ministry of Fear and A Gun for Sale, which was turned into This Gun for Hire, both work as cracking good movies of their time. Now, they may have little or nothing to do with the books, but they worked as good movies, and I don't think one should really hark back particularly, except it is an interesting exercise to hark back to see how much they... And the strange thing is, there is a strange underlying fidelity, even in those Hollywood vehicles. Gun for Sale, Gun for Hire as an Alan Ladd vehicle, Ministry of Fear is a Fritz Lang film. And yet, the strength of Greene is that even in those Hollywood vehicles, Greene underlies it. And that's, for me, is the consistent pleasure.
Throughout the American cinema's dealings with Greene, its filmmakers have tended to dash to one extreme or the other of the sliding scale in his novels between action melodrama and moral or religious concerns. If Greene was unhappy about too little of the latter in films like This Gun for Hire and The Ministry of Fear, he was perhaps unhappy about too much of it in the floodlit religiosity and simplified morality of films like the two versions of The Power and the Glory, one a TV adaptation with Olivier in 1961, the other John Ford's 1947 film with Henry Fonda. Ford's camera lays many a visual benediction on the movie, but Dudley Nichols's script turns the textured moral greys of Greene's novel into crude black and white. Used to helping Ford clean up western towns, he wrote Stagecoach, Nichols now sets about cleaning up Greene's whiskey priest, robbing him of any hint of soiled humanity and feeding gleaming pieties into Fonda's Nebraskan drawl.
First year, well, the whole thing seemed fantastic. I couldn't believe there was any real reason to leave the country. Things like that have happened before. I thought I'd stay another month and see if things got better. And then another month, and another month. You know how time goes by. Yes. Then I began to lose grace. I began to have pride. I began to think I was a brave man. Who knows, a martyr.
John Ford's The Fugitive. In between these bizarre and often bedeviled splurges of American interest in Greene, British cinema has also rallied to his cause. And though Greene came out looking the worse for wear in some of these, the early films for Corder and Ealing, later films like The Heart of the Matter and Loser Takes All, he was magnificently served by the three British films made in the late 40s, which have ever since set a measure by which all Greene movies should be judged.
Don't worry, Rose. I know what to do. Just leave everything to me. You don't want them to take me away, do you? Don't worry, Rose. I've got it all thought out. It won't hurt.
What won't hurt, Pinky?
Dying together. You don't want to leave me, do you?
Pinky, it's a mortal sin.
Just one more?
No. It's despair, Pinky. It's the worst sin of all. There must be some way not to. Let's talk about it first. There's time to talk.
If the worst happens, we gotta act quick. You don't want to see me hang, do you?
No.
Carol Marsh as Rose and Richard Attenborough as Pinky in the Boulting brothers' somberly enthralling film of Brighton Rock. This, unlike The Fugitive, had the nerve to follow the novelist and link the theme of religious quest not to an improbable paragon hero, but to a grubby and vicious anti-hero. But producer Roy Boulting recalls the difficulties involved in incorporating Greene's Catholicism into a thriller structure.
When you read Greene, in terms of his atmosphere, the quality of the dialogue, it is film dialogue, it is film atmosphere. It's written down for you on the pages. But you have to handle his theology with, I think, great care. But a lot of the films that have been based upon Graham's preoccupation, his struggle with evil within himself, his desire to come to grips with the ultimate meaning of Catholicism in all its complexities. The films that have been made like The Heart of the Matter, apart from not reaching the public, they never quite succeeded in stating his case for him.
For Greene adapters, part of the trouble lies in trying to keep a movie audience happy, which is a very different animal from a solitary novel reader or even a caucus of critics at a press show, while weighing in with the great issues of religious faith and doubt. Greene himself, as Peter Duffell recalls, is the first to recognise the difference between the two media.
I did, as you may know, work for a long time on a screenplay of The Honorary Consul with Graham Greene, which is the one he actually wanted made. And I would work on the script and then go and see him every few days and take pages of material to him to discuss with him. And there were things that I didn't feel that I could take out of the screenplay which were in the book. And he would say to me, well, you don't want that, do you? His attitude is totally rational, pragmatic and everything else, because he understands the nature of film. And you say, well, you don't need all that theology. I mean, that'll bore people to death in the cinema. I'll take it out. And I would heave a sigh of relief because I'd felt that myself, but didn't dare to do it at the time. But I don't think you should just laboriously put scene numbers on a novel. You've got to recreate it in filmic terms.
The answer in movie terms may be to drop Catholicism with a capital C altogether and concentrate on a more generalised play-off between moral antagonists, the kind of thunderous, shadow-swathed set to so brilliantly realised in The Third Man. Here and in The Fallen Idol, both made in the late 1940s, Greene found his perfect collaborator, Carol Reed. Reed knew the answer. Don't let the pace or tension slacken. Don't whitewash the heroes or caricature the villains. Keep the audience dandled throughout over a tantalising ambiguity of motive. In The Fallen Idol, Greene's short story of the adulterous butler, the jealous wife, and the rich master's son caught in the crossfire of spite and secrecy, Reed makes every pause count, as well as every act of passion or violence, and each dialogue exchange is like the drip of icy water.
Come along, Master Philip, sit down there. Get on to that salad.
Ben's is going to take me for a walk this afternoon.
No, he isn't. Not with all this work to do.
There'll be time enough for both.
Oh, please.
Work first and pleasure afterwards. Easy to see you've been eating between meals, Master Philip. Sick to death of your ways, spoiling the boy.
He didn't, I took it.
Lying again, Master Philip?
There's lies and lies.
What do you mean by that?
Some lies are just kindness.
Kindness? Temper? I won't have you swearing in front of the boy. Oh, do go on, Master Philip. What are you waiting for?
I don't want any.
Master Philip, do as you're told and eat it up. Go along.
Why don't you let Baines take me for a walk?
Because I say so.
I hate you.
My happiest experience was naturally with Carol Reed, I think. And perhaps most with our first film we did together called The Fallen Idol. Perhaps that was more of an author's film than The Third Man, which was more a director's film.
It's unlikely to be a coincidence that the three best Greene adaptations, Brighton Rock, The Fallen Idol, The Third Man, were all written for the screen by Greene himself. There are writers whose mood and style other writers can make a fair stab at imitating, the what-ho idiom of P.G. Wodehouse or the hard-boiled style of Chandler. But Greene is notoriously elusive. Even he sometimes can't pin himself down. He once failed to win a New Statesman competition inviting pastiches of his style, which he anonymously entered, only to come second. It's no surprise that his cinematic luck didn't always hold after the 1940s. Once past that decade mirabilis whose dark tones so suited him, Greene must have felt like a Christian sent out into the daylight to meet the more ruthless movie world lions, who had been kept waiting far too long already. The catalogue of man-eating mishaps is awesome. Greene bore the blow of a terminally glum version of The Heart of the Matter, later revamped and titled The Mau Mau Story for Italian release. He suffered the complete treachery, his words, of Joseph Mankiewicz's The Quiet American, lobotomizing Greene's anti-American novel into a bland war intrigue. He saw Our Man in Havana and The Comedians, both scripted by himself, slide towards weighty indistinction. He looked aghast and powerless as Otto Preminger, clutching the rights to The Human Factor, turned it into something resembling a lost episode of The Sweeney. And he watched, or rather he refused to watch, Maggie Smith gurgling bravely through the 30 years too old title role in Travels with My Aunt.
It's odd how we seem to meet only at religious ceremonies. The last time I saw you was at your baptism. I was not asked, but I came, like the wicked fairy.
I didn't know there was any breach. Mother often spoke of you.
She was a very saintly woman, my sister Angelica. She should, by rights, have had a white funeral, La Pucelle.
I don't quite see. La Pucelle means...
It's Joan of Arc, the maid, the virgin.
Exactly. Well, to put it bluntly, Aunt Augusta, I am here.
To put it bluntly to you, Henry, that had nothing to do with Angelica.
Alec McCowan with Maggie Smith in Travels with My Aunt. The irony is that if you took a show of hands in the movie industry, the overwhelming majority of directors and producers would probably consider Greene to be a cinematic writer, and Greene himself agrees.
What the cinema has given to one, I think, is a different kind of description for backgrounds, what one might call moving scenery. I want my descriptions to move and not to be stationary.
The screenwriters, though, faced with the nuts and bolts job of turning this cinematic talent into cinema, have reservations. To begin with, in the inevitable contraction process of turning a novel into a film, what on earth do you leave out?
The Honorary Consul is a long book by Greene standards, and my first draft, which tried to preserve as faithfully as possible, as much as possible, the novel, was a sort of 4.5-hour job. And what happens then is that you really have to decide what is the essential center of the story and take a machete to the rest. And it means throwing away things that are wonderful in the novel, including my own favorite character in the novel, who's the Argentinian novelist Saavedra, who remained, it may well have been my own fault, but remained obstinately a literary figure, I thought, in the early drafts of the screenplay. And I felt a great sense of relief when I sent him on his way.
The essential center of the story, in Christopher Hampton's phrase, is indeed the rub. And perhaps the reason the filmmakers who nervously seek to tame that hydra-headed animal, a Greene novel, so often fail, is that they can't decide which head to feed or flatter first. If they go for the one called plot, they'll probably be mauled by the ones called mood and theme, who'll feel jealous and neglected, and vice versa. Richard Brooke, who's adapted Greene's novella Dr. Fisher of Geneva for the TV screen, is in no doubt about the solution. The filmmaker's got to find a way to charm all or most of the heads at the same time.
The narrative line in all his books is so powerful, and it certainly is in Dr. Fisher. But of course the interesting point comes with Greene adaptations into film, what you do about the philosophy, or some people have called it theology, that's inherent in the books. I believe the two are entwined with one another. You can't really split them up very successfully. All the characters are motivated by the philosophy. What you have to do as a screenplay writer is to harness the philosophical content and make it work for you in an exciting and entertaining way.
My greed is of a different kind from theirs. I'm not greedy for trinkets. I like to think that my greed is more like God's. Is God greedy? The believers say that he is greedy for our love, but judging from the world that he is supposed to have made, he is greedy only for our humiliation. That greed is inexhaustible. It's bottomless. The world grows more and more miserable while he twists the endless screw. But he does give us presents. Universal suicide would defeat his purpose. He gives us presents to alleviate the humiliation we suffer.
The late James Mason in the title role, with Alan Bates as Jones in Dr. Fisher of Geneva. Greene himself agrees that a story told straight and filleted of its dramatic or thematic content might as well not be told at all, as emerges in his 1939 review of Jean Renoir's film La Bête Humaine.
La Bête Humaine is more a director's than an actor's picture. It retains all the small incidents which English directors cut out of a script because they are not on the storyline and do not advance the plot. As if a plot mattered at all, except as a dramatized illustration of a character and a way of life.
Crusading words. But we're still no nearer discovering how to hew a 300-page Greene novel into a 2-hour Greene film without serious loss of life. Peter Duffell is sure that if a book's psychology and philosophy are to be preserved along with its plot, then some kind of eye-blink cinematic equivalent must be found for what in a novel might be a whole page of exposition.
The action should be a mirror of a psychological state. You see, in The Third Man, for example, when Reed tilts the camera and Holly Martin or whoever runs down one of those wet streets in Vienna, it's a piece of action, but it is a mirror of a mental state, I think. It's an image that says something about a mental state. I think it's an image of desolation, of despair, of betrayal, or whatever.
Holly, I'd like to cut you in, old man. There's nobody left in Vienna I can really trust, and we've always done everything together. When you make up your mind, send me a message. I'll meet you any place, any time, and when we do meet, old man, it's you I want to see, not the police. Remember that, won't you? Don't be so gloomy. After all, it's not that awful. Well, what the fella said. In Italy, for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, and bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had 500 years of democracy and peace, and what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. So long, Holly.
Orson Welles as Harry Lime, borne away into legend on a cloud of zither music. After delivering the one speech Greene didn't write, Welles composed it himself. The film, too, has become a legend, although not without a struggle or two en route, particularly in one area. And the more one explores Greene's cinema, the more this area seems to become the locus classicus of all the most intriguing difficulties. That area is the ending. Quentin Falk again.
Greene originally wrote it as having a rather soft end, where Alida Valli as Anna and Joseph Cotton as Holly go off together after Harry Lime's second funeral. He was talked out of having that ending for the film by Reed himself, who said he thought that it would work much better to have this remarkable long shot, which most people remember, of the funeral and of Joseph Cotton standing with Trevor Howard, who's the policeman. The shot itself perhaps a minute and a half, and Alida Valli just walks past Joseph Cotton off into the distance. And this was Reed's input. Not only was it an input, but it also was an input that was acknowledged by Greene himself.
The vexed ending of The Third Man is echoed in other Greene films. The controversial hospital scene with its crisp white nun and inspirational crucifix, which closes Brighton Rock, and which Greene found to be too sanctimonious by half. The radically changed ending to The Comedians, which was Greene's own idea, killing off Major Jones and elevating Brown to Rebels leader, and even the ending of the new TV adaptation of Dr. Fisher of Geneva.
The book ends with Dr. Fisher killing himself. And we shot that scene and had intended using it, but when we came to cut the film, we found that it seemed extraordinarily melodramatic and really out of a different genre altogether. The bomb party is, I think, a very strong scene and is followed by a very strange short scene in which all the threads of the story are tied up. And we see Fisher utterly exposed, utterly naked for the first time, a pathetic figure for the first time. And he goes up the hill and into a, really without the death, he goes into a sort of dark night of his own making. And what we did, Michael Lindsay Hogg, the director, talked to the composer about how to get across the original feeling of the story without actually showing it all. And I think that the composer, Trevor Jones, has composed a piece of music that lasts, 2.5 minutes, that runs under this rather mysterious little scene between the three of them, and then swells as Fisher goes up the hill and out of our sight, and ends with a single note on the trumpet, which I hope hints at what we're trying to drive at. I told Graham Greene about this new idea for the ending and what we were going to do, and he was surprisingly enthusiastic. It was he who encouraged me to stick with it, and I think that that's a measure of his extraordinary grasp of filmmaking.
Richard Brooke. It's perhaps a measure of the cinema's struggle to fit a richly rounded literary Oeuvre into a square or rectangular movie screen, that they can maneuver it most of the way, but the final push is always the most problematic. Greene simply doesn't write endings that sign off a story in the movie-favoured manner, leaving the audience to file out in a mood of optimism or certainty. His endings are either ambiguous, as in The Comedians, or powerfully pessimistic, as in Brighton Rock and Dr. Fisher, which makes it all the more touching and flattering to Greene that the cinema keeps trying. There are remakes of Loser Takes All and The Quiet American now in the pipeline. There's gold in them their yarns, they must keep saying to themselves. And of course they're right. The only problem is it's gold that doesn't always wear a flashy smile, and even worse, isn't always exchangeable for easy money at the box office. So the cinema industry is presented with the almighty frustration of pursuing mammon through a writer much more interested in God. And in doing so, they become so over-earnest themselves that in film after film they miss out one of Greene's great and shining attributes, the other side to his tragic power, his sense of humour and mischief. There can be no more affectionate way to wish him a happy birthday than to present his own soul-speaking appearance in a feature film, itself a masterpiece of hoaxmanship. The victim was director François Truffaut.
He wanted an English insurance agent in La Nuit Américaine, and a friend of mine, Michael Mayer, proposed himself for Truffaut. But Truffaut looked at him and said, "You look too intellectual." And just a joke, I said, "Well, let's try me." And we went out to a party. He didn't know who I was. And the casting woman approved and introduced me to Truffaut. And I arranged for picked up at the railway station, because if they'd come to my flat, they would have discovered my name. But he only discovered who I was about halfway through the rehearsals. He was slightly embarrassed, but that all went well.
Eh bien, il faut le terminer, ce film. Tout dépend des assurances anglaises. Qu'est-ce que dit Monsieur Johansson?
No, it's impossible. I'm sorry, it's impossible. I've been speaking for a whole hour to London, to the insurance company. You can't redo the scene with Alexandre with another actor. I'm sorry, you'll have to find another solution.
Tonight's Kaleidoscope, Greene on the Screen, was written and presented by Nigel Andrews. The reader was John Bott, and the producer, Richard Dunn.